This is part one of a two-part conversation with entertainment attorney Cassandra Spangler. Cassandra specializes in music law. So thank you so much for agreeing to have this chat with me. I really appreciate it. And I know that you have a ton to share with our listeners. And of course, I should probably say that this is Cassandra Spangler. Yay!
Hello.
World-renowned lawyer.
Hello.
So, and in full disclosure, of course, I should also say that you're my lawyer.
I am.
Which is so cool.
Yes, I am proudly your lawyer.
Thank you. I am so excited to have you as my lawyer. You've been my lawyer for quite a few years now. Pretty much from the beginning, guiding me through this career we call music and entertainment.
Yeah.
So, first of all, what made you decide to become a lawyer? I was just curious about that.
Yeah, so I actually decided that I wanted to work in music before I decided that I wanted to become a lawyer. So I started out as a musician myself. I used to play drums growing up, and I just really fell in love with music. But I knew that I didn't want to be a professional musician. I just didn't have it in me. So I decided that I wanted to work in the music industry in some form. And initially, my dream was to someday start a record label. And then, during the time I was in college, is when Napster and those things started happening, and really the whole business model of the industry started to change so much. And labels are, it's becoming tougher and tougher to run a label. So I decided to go to law school and go into the legal side of it because I figured no matter what happens with the business model, artists are always going to need lawyers. In fact, probably more so than they did even before because they're doing so much now on their own. So that was kind of how I became, decided to go into that aspect of it.
So through being you actually are a musician yourself, which I think is really helpful because you know what it's like and what musicians go through. Can you tell us a little bit about what you did as a drummer? Did you have your own band?
I did, yeah. I was in a few bands. Mostly, I grew up listening to a lot of punk rock. So I was in some punk bands, some indie rock bands. Never anything, super successful, but it was definitely helpful, as you mentioned, in, giving me a perspective of what musicians go through and what bands go through, the different relationships within the band and interactions with band members, and then what happens with the recordings and what happens with the ownership of things. So, yeah, I think it's been very helpful to me to be able to see that side of it.
That's fabulous. And so you actually came from sort of the punk rock world. Is that your favorite style of music?
I don't know that I have a favorite. That's definitely what I grew up listening to, and that was my kind of start in the music industry, was working at a few different punk rock independent labels. And then I also have always listened to a lot of hip-hop, and nowadays that's probably the bulk of what I listen to is hip-hop. But I listen to a little bit of everything, too. I grew up listening to a lot of classic rock from my parents and R&B from the 60s and just kind of a little bit of everything.
Right, which is, again, fantastic because you have to be able to service all those different types of artists. And so if you know something about a little bit about all the different types, I would think that you'd be able to see what the different needs might be, which actually, are there different needs, do you think, between each type of music genre, or no?
Definitely, yeah. It's interesting because, the music industry itself is such a small industry, but then within that you have, each genre is kind of its own little subset of the industry. And the contracts are a little bit different, and you have different situations that arise. With rock, you often have bands, so you're dealing with, how to split things up between 4 or 5 band members. In hip-hop, you have unique sort of relationships between the artist and the producer. which is a little bit different than the role of a producer in rock and pop. So, and then jazz, of course, has its own set of situations, classical. So, yeah, every genre kind of has its own unique problems and issues that come up.
Okay, which I actually had not even thought about that until we were just talking about it. It didn't even occur to me that could be possible until you said what you said. So that's pretty interesting. I wonder how many different people already knew that. You have all these different genres that you work with currently as clients?
Yeah, I do. I work, I would say, primarily within hip-hop, but then I do have clients in other genres as well, rock, pop, country, jazz.
Okay.
So yeah, a little bit of everything.
And what would you say, if you can say, the thing that you find artists need the most?
I think contracts is a big one, and it's something that a lot of artists overlook it, or they wait, to put things in writing, and then at that point, sometimes disputes come up.
Oh.
So, because you're dealing with really intellectual property, and it's not tangible, and it really comes down to copyrights, so you have to make sure that if you're collaborating with other songwriters or producers, or if you're hiring studio musicians, you have to make sure that all of the ownership is, the splits are put into writing, everyone's compensation is put into writing, credit, all of that. And sometimes what happens is people work on a project and then they collaborate and they wait until it's done, and then they go to put it in writing, and people have disputes about what they should get. And at that point, the artist has already spent money on studio time and everything else. So it's really important to do that stuff sooner rather than later. And it's something that a lot of artists, especially if they're doing everything on their own and they're not using a label, then a lot of artists overlook that, or they wait too long to do it. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that I do is, helping out, drafting those contracts.
So contracts, which is all part of the process. So maybe I should back up a bit and ask, what's the first thing? I'm an artist, and actually we'll use my example because I don't play an instrument. I just write the songs, and so I do the lyrics, I do the melody, I do all that good stuff. But I have somebody else that deals with the instruments and producing the song with me. So I'm brand new to the industry, and I wrote this song. What is the very first thing I should be thinking to do?
So it kind of depends. If you have not collaborated with anyone else, then the first thing you would want to do is register the copyright.
All right.
If you have collaborated, then you first want to have an agreement with whoever you collaborated with, whether it's a producer or a co-writer, setting forth everybody's percentages of ownership. And then once that's signed, then the next thing you want to do is to register the copyright.
All right. At what point does a lawyer, well, obviously if the contracts are needed, then that's the point maybe that the lawyer comes in, or do you get a lawyer involved even before that?
You can, yeah. It depends on the circumstances. So if there's any kind of dispute over what the percentages should be, then you might want to get a lawyer involved right away to kind of try to negotiate that. But certainly at the point where you're drafting the agreement, some people are comfortable registering the copyrights on their own. Other people are not. So that's another thing that I sometimes help with, is submitting the actual registrations. But yeah, I mean, I think, whenever you're at the point that you've really decided what those percentages should be and what the terms of the collaboration should be, that's the time when you should contact the lawyer, if not sooner.
All right. Now, I remember from when we started years ago now, that you had told me about some things, of course, that I didn't know about that I should be doing. And I had done a lot of research on my own, and yet I was like, wait, what? I have to do what? In terms of things like Sound exchange. I think I already had a PRO, but some people don't know that they should choose a PRO. Publishing, I remember that was oh gosh, what now? Now what? I've got this song, this finished product. Now how am I going to get it out there? And so, what besides copyright and contracts would you say people need to be focused on as well?
Yeah, so once you have the contract signed and you have submitted the copyright, then you can start to think about releasing the music. And whenever you are ready to do that, you want to make sure that you are registered with the PRO, which for people who don't know, that's a performing rights organization. The three main ones in the United States are ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC. And they all do the same thing. You can only sign up with one. So it's really just kind of a personal preference, which one you want to go with. And then you want to make sure to sign up with them and register the songs so that you can collect those public performance royalties, which are royalties on the publishing side, and they're royalties that are paid by radio stations, certain websites like YouTube, also streaming websites to a certain extent, clubs, so if it's played by a DJ or if it's played by a band in a live venue, all of those entities pay these public performance royalties, and those are collected by the PROs, and then they pay them out to the songwriters. So if you don't register with the PRO and your song is getting played on the radio, or DJs are playing it in clubs, or it's getting played a lot on YouTube or Spotify, you can't collect those public performance royalties unless you have registered with the PRO. So it's really important to do that, otherwise that money is just sitting there and you're losing out. You also want to register with Sound Exchange. They also collect the public performance royalties, but on the sound recording side. So one of the things that I find is very difficult for most artists to understand is that there are two separate copyrights in every record that you release. There's a copyright in the underlying musical composition, which is the music and the lyrics, and that's what's known as the publishing. Separately, there's a copyright in the actual sound recording, which sometimes people refer to that as the masters, the master recordings. And those are two totally separate copyrights, separate pieces of property. Oftentimes they are owned by different people or different entities. So you want to make sure that you kind of grasp the difference there, and then the different income streams that come in on each side. So you have the PROs collecting the public performance royalties on the publishing side, and then you have Sound Exchange, which collects public performance royalties on the sound recording side. Those are much more limited. It's really only satellite radio, but if you do have a hit song and it's getting played on satellite radio, there are royalties there, and you can't collect them until you register with Sound Exchange. And it's free to register, so there's really no downfall to it. So you want to make sure that you have registered, set up accounts with both. Sometimes they take a while to get the accounts set up. It could be 6 weeks or sometimes even more. So you want to keep that in mind when you're planning your release date, and make sure that you set the accounts up far enough ahead of time. And then once you have your accounts, you want to register all of your releases, both with Sound Exchange and also with your PRO.
That right there is enough to say might need some help with that, because it takes a lot of God, you have to be so organized. Which
and it can start to get very complicated when you have people that have contributed to the writing but they're not on the recording, or people with publishing deals or record deals. It starts to get very complicated about how all that stuff gets split up. So, you want to make sure that it's done the right way.
Now, is that also something that you would help people with? I shy away from saying doing it for them, but, I guess that is kind of what I'm asking. Or is that something that you could hire somebody else to do, or how's that work?
Yeah, it is something that I do. There are some clients where I do their registrations for them with the PROs and Sound Exchange. Other clients are more comfortable doing it themselves. It just kind of depends. You can also hire companies to administer all that stuff for you. Usually they're going to take a percentage of everything if they do that. So you want to, I don't want to say be careful, but you just want to make sure that you understand what they're taking in exchange for doing all that for you before you sign up.
And then we have publishing and distribution. So that is completely different as well, correct?
Yeah. So nowadays, if you're an artist who is not signed to a label, the good thing is nowadays it's very easy to get your music out there. It used to be, 15 or 20 years ago when everyone was buying physical CDs, you pretty much had to be signed to a label in order to be able to have the CDs manufactured and get them into the retail stores. So there was a huge barrier to entry, which doesn't exist anymore. Now, it's very easy to get your music out to Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, all the major digital platforms. And the way that most people do that is they use what is called a digital aggregator. And those are companies, some of the big ones are CD Baby, TuneCore, DistroKid. And you basically pay them like an annual fee or a one-time fee, and they get your music out to all of the digital platforms. They don't take any kind of ownership of it, so it's a very simple process. Publishing, so that's dealing with, going back to the 2 copyrights, that kind of distribution deals mostly with the sound recording. Publishing is a little bit trickier. So really, publishing is exploiting the actual musical composition. So one way is through PROs, which collect that source of publishing income. There can also be publishing income for people who are songwriters but not recording artists. So if you write songs but you don't want to be the one performing on the recording and you want to sort of get those songs placed with other artists and then have those artists perform it on the recording. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of barriers to entry in that aspect. It really just comes down to getting your songs into the right hands. Mm-hmm. There's not really an easy way of going about that part of it, unfortunately. But, again, the good news is if you're an artist, it's easy to get the stuff distributed nowadays.
So, from experience, I know that there's still a couple more steps, but I think that's the gist of what you need to be able to do. We could certainly get into ISRC. I always say it backwards. Is it ISRC or IRSC?
No, you have it. You had it right. It's ISRC.
ISRC, codes and all that good stuff. Which, like I said, we don't need to get into all that unless you want to, but, it is an incredible industry and very layered, it seems. And if you don't know what you're doing and you go in it without consulting, I think you do, leave tons of money on the table potentially. But I think you would get very frustrated and sort of give up. So I would always recommend that people try to work with a lawyer first off, because they are going to know what all the steps are, and no matter how prepared you think you are, there's always going to be, as I found out, a step that you had no idea even existed.
Yeah, it's frustrating, but it's, again, it's the industry model has changed so much where 20 years ago and beyond, kind of had to be signed to a record label, and then the record label would sort of take care of most of this stuff for you. Nowadays, artists are able to get the music out there on their own, which is good, but it also means now they have to take care of all this administrative stuff themselves, which gets very frustrating for a lot of people. Other people, I'm always so happy when I have clients like you who are willing to go through all the steps and take care of everything, because it's really, you're so much better off in the long run if all that stuff is there and that foundation is there. That way, if something blows up, everything is already set, all the paperwork is already done, and you're not having to go to court and deal with some kind of a lawsuit because you didn't have the paperwork done, and now the song's a huge hit and everybody wants their piece of it. So yeah, it can be a frustrating process, but it's also it's rewarding in a way, because artists get to really build it themselves and see how everything is done each step of the way.
And as you were talking, I actually was thinking, there are so many, I think, artists out there that, and from back in the day, that they had, the company did everything for them, and then something happened, they parted ways for whatever reason, and maybe found out a few things like, oh, I don't own this, or, oh, my income is suddenly gone. And they had to start all over again and maybe reacquire their catalog or whatever you have to do, depending on the person's situation. And they are now being forced to do it themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Or, they just kind of trusted all of these other people to take care of it, or they trusted the label to take care of it, and then found out maybe the money wasn't all going where it was supposed to be going. So the good thing with this stuff nowadays is when you use one of these digital aggregators, you could just log into your account and go right to your statements and see how many people are streaming your music, how much you got paid from each different digital outlet, and what your payments are for that quarter and that kind of thing. So there's a lot more transparency.
And so, all of this, I think, is saying that one of the things that you should take care of as an artist immediately and always is you need to have a lawyer. You must. I don't even think that there's an argument for why you don't need a lawyer at this point. Unless, I guess, you are a lawyer, in which case, I don't know, you're a lawyer. Would you hire somebody else to take care of your music if you got back into the making music part?
I think it's absolutely true. I always tell people, if you intend to make money from music, even if it's just a small amount of money, it doesn't matter the amount. If that's what your goal is, then you need to have a lawyer, because you need to make sure that this stuff, again, because it's intellectual property, so it's not something you can touch and can't keep inventory of it. So you really need to make sure the legal stuff is structured the right way, and a lawyer can really help you do that.
And as a lawyer yourself, would you hire outside, or would you just take care of it yourself, you think?
I think I probably would take care of this stuff myself, but I have clients that are lawyers that are not entertainment lawyers, that are some, musicians on the side, or they have children that are musicians, so they hire me. So I think it's definitely, it's a very important person to have on your team.
Okay, and I'm glad you just said that, because I'm saying lawyer, but really, it's an entertainment lawyer. It's not just any lawyer. It's an entertainment lawyer. So that's a pitfall, I think, right there, that artists don't have an entertainment lawyer on their side. Can you think of any other pitfalls that artists should sort of look out for?
Yeah, kind of related to that is signing things without having it reviewed by a lawyer and without really thinking it through. Because a lot of times artists are so desperate, to get some kind of a deal, that once something is presented to them, they either don't have a lawyer review it and they just sign it, or they do have a lawyer review it and they sign it anyway. You just want to make sure because any kind of, whether it's management or label or any kind of deal that you're going to see in the music industry usually lasts for a very long period of time. And it's usually very, very difficult to get out of. So once you sign it, you're locked in for 5 years, 10 years. So you want to really make sure that you're not getting kind of blinded by this, especially I think in the days of social media. Artists want to be able to say that they got this or they got that, and then, they're not thinking about the long term. So I think it's really important to make sure that before you sign anything, you have a lawyer look at it and you sit on it for a little while. Nobody should ever be pressuring you to sign something, on the spot, certainly, or even within a matter of days. You should always have enough time to thoroughly review it and to kind of sit on it and really think about what it means and what the long-term implications are before you sign it.
I think that is perfect advice, because, again, I was just thinking, I can imagine that some people do get this opportunity, and I've got the air quotes going, that they think, oh my God, I have to sign this right away or they're going to take it away from me. And maybe that's even implied, if not outright said. And so they might be inclined to say, oh, I'm sure it's fine. I read it over it. I'm sure it's fine. And then they sign it. What you're saying, don't do that. Definitely have a lawyer look at it. And then beyond having a lawyer look at it, and again, an entertainment lawyer, beyond that, read it over again yourself. Come up with some questions or whatever, because this is about your career, and you could be locked into something long term, like you said, that you're wishing you could get out of it immediately, if not sooner.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, it makes me really happy when I have clients who send me, a list of questions, because it shows me that they actually read it themselves as well. Because that's important too. Don't just have your lawyer read it yourself as well, and then if there are things you don't understand, make a list of those things and ask those questions to your lawyer, because that's what they're there for. And it's better, it's always better to ask before you sign it than afterward, because it's going to be very difficult and usually very expensive to try to get out of a contract.
So, if all of that is done, I have my lawyer, I have all of my contracts in place. I've got all my copyrights done. I've got a PRO. I've got everything I need. Is there anything that we're forgetting?
I would say the only other thing, actually two other things that I normally recommend. So the first thing you might want to think about doing is registering a trademark in your name. If you have like a stage name that you use as an artist, you should register the trademark in that name. And what that will do is protect you against anyone else from using the same or a confusingly similar name as an artist. And it also helps you make sure there's nobody else out there who already owns that name, because that happens sometimes too. Artists start using a name and they start building up a fan base and they spend money on marketing, only to find out that someone else owns the trademark and is sending them cease and desist letters, and now they have to change their name, which can be expensive if you've already had marketing stuff printed up, and now you have to start over as far as name recognition with fans and things. So definitely something to think about is registering the trademark in your name.
Okay, and that just to clarify, even if you are going as your legal name as well?
If you're using your legal name, it gets more difficult. It's harder to get that approved, but depending what level you're at, if you are more of a well-known artist, then it's still possible to register your legal name as a trademark.
Interesting. Okay, so trademarks. All right, and was there a second one, or was that?
Yeah, so the second thing that I recommend people do is to set up either a corporation or an LLC to use for all of your music-related business. And the benefit to doing that, the main legal benefit is that if you ever get sued, let's say somebody says you infringed on their copyright, or let's say you're playing a show and someone gets hurt and you get sued, if you're using an LLC or a corporation, they can only sue you for the business assets and not any personal assets that you might have, like if you own a home or cars that you own in your personal name. So that's the main legal benefit of doing that. And then there may also be tax benefits, which you can discuss with your accountant. And then also it just looks a little bit more professional. Okay. And it's a pretty easy thing to do. It varies, the process varies from state to state a little bit, but it's usually pretty inexpensive and a pretty easy process, a matter of like filing a form or two with the state, and then getting it set up. And then once you do that, you would put all of the contracts and the copyrights and everything in the name of the entity.
And it sounds too like maybe not everybody should be taking this route, so that's something else to discuss with your lawyer.
Right.
Perfecto. And, I would love to know how people can get in touch with you, because they might be listening and going, I want Cassandra Spangler to be my entertainment lawyer. So why don't we tell everybody where they can contact you?
Sure. So they can go to my website, which is cspanglermusiclaw.com, and that has all my contact info on there. They can also email me at info@cspanglermusiclaw.com. They can check out my social media. I'm on Twitter, C-SPAN Music Law. Instagram is C-SPAN ESQ. And then they can also find my Facebook page by searching for my name.
This concludes part 1 of a conversation with entertainment attorney Cassandra Spangler. Be sure to check back for part 2, where you'll get more helpful tips to guide you along your music industry journey.